Hey everyone, this is Jess, and we have a video that has just come out.
Bringing of fresh
off the grill.
Not just come out, maybe last week, of Jordan Peterson on Theo Vaughn. And my friend Luke sent me a link and he said, hey, Jordan Peterson's talking about the book of Job. So
I can't stop thinking about you.
let's take a look and add some commentary or something.
Sometimes I think there's like this, like, what is nature thinking the whole time about our behaviors, you know? Like, wonder what,
Well, the thing is that we're all punished for what we put at the top, right? Because the structure that you use to orient yourself in your life is dependent on your values. And you might say, well, if you don't value human life, let's say, above all, well, then you don't value yourself above all. You value something else above that. You're going to pay for that in one way or another. Now, you might say, well, that's a price that I think is worth paying, or I don't think that human beings should be put on the top. You know, that's your prerogative. But you will absolutely 100% pay in full for everything that you've done and for everything that you haven't done. I mean, how can it be otherwise?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what are you going to do? Reality isn't going to make itself manifest because of your whim. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, and you know, you can think about that religiously or not. There's no escaping from what is.
Right.
You know, and I'm going to write a chapter soon on the book of Job, and it's a very interesting book, because what happens in that book is that it's really a shocking book. What happens is that God has a bet with Satan, which is, you know, a little ethically questionable, let's say.
Yeah, this would be
So
a good time
there's
for a
Job.
DraftKings ad too. I'm just joking, but that'd be funny.
Job's a good guy.
Uh-huh.
And Satan gets word of him, and he knows God's happy with him, and he goes to God and he says, you know, Job, you know that guy you think so great? I don't think he's so great. I think if you let me torture him, I can make him denounce you and lose faith. And God says, I don't think so. He's yours. And, you know, people in their lives, you know, sometimes they'll enter a period where all hell is breaking loose and everything seems to be conspiring against them. So these things happen. And so Job, it's like, first of all, his whole family's destroyed, then everything he owns. So that's act one. Then Satan curses him with a terrible skin disease.
Yeah, that's tough.
Right.
Tough,
And then he has to sit in the ashes, scraping himself. And then his friends come along and tell him that he must have done something wrong because otherwise the universe wouldn't be conspiring against him. So that's about as bad as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then God himself comes along and says, who are you to complain about your fate? Right. Now, if you don't think that's going to happen to you in your life, you're not very smart, because that is going to happen to you in your life. So then the question is, well, what the hell should you do about it? And one answer would be, well, that sucks. It's God and Satan against you. You know, you're kind of outmatched. It's completely unfair because you were good and everything that you valued is taken away from you. So what should you do? You know, would you shake your fist at the sky and raise a middle finger and say, fuck you, you know, like now I'm on the side of Cain and the devils and I'm going to be resentful and bitter. And
I think it's just so interesting how he how he frames this. Like, I mean, the book of Job is kind of like a Rorschach test for people. Like, people come away with all kinds of stuff, and like including myself. So it's hilarious.
And people might look and think, well, it's no wonder you're resentful and bitter, like you lost your whole family, you have a terrible disease, your friends are laughing at you. Right, so you have every reason. That isn't what happens in the story. Job.
This is one of those things, like, one of the things I like about the book of Job is that it kind of refuses to be pigeonholed into some sort of, for lack of a better word, ideology. Because you can make the argument that that's exactly what Job does. I'm more and more convinced that the book is written purposely ambiguous in some of these areas, so you don't have clear-cut answers to lean upon. And actually, the book kind of goes out of its way to anticipate ideas that you might have and then undermine them. So, like, this is a an example of one. So Peterson says that, you could go the way of Cain and be bitter and shake your fist at God and all that stuff. But I think you can make the case that Job does that. That's part of what happens to Job as he goes through this. And then, well, let's just listen to Peterson here say what he thinks happens to Job. And
decides that no matter what happens to him, and he means that, no matter what happens to him, he's going to maintain his ethical orientation and aim up. And I think but then you think, look, man.
Yeah, like this idea, he's going to maintain his ethical orientation and aim up. I think that happens too. But it's out of, it's the reason why he's able to kind of go, he has nothing to lose, so he's going to aim up, let's say. But Job even says this. The reason why I am calling out God and want him to answer is because I have nothing. I'm doing it out of the bitterness of my soul, and I have nothing to lose. It's kind of only because I'm suffering so much that I'm willing to do this. And this is this weird thing where, like, I don't know if this is unfair or not. Let me know, because it's a conversation to be had. Peterson, on the one hand, says the way of bitterness, the way of shaking your fist at God, or the way of aiming up and aiming at the highest thing possible. And which one are you going to choose? But Job kind of slams those things together, and what you get is, I'm going to aim at the highest, which is some sort of answer or justification from God. I'm going to approach God directly, but it's only because of the bitterness of my soul, and only because I've been taken down so far. And this is sort of the, in AA, the idea of rock bottom. Like, it takes you have to get to rock bottom before you have some place to stand, I guess.
Forget about the religious trappings. Here's hell. Hell is when you get cancer. And then you're bitter and resentful about it, and you make your last 6 months a living fucking nightmare. Right. And so you might say, well, you've got cancer, and that sucks. And no doubt it sucks. And maybe it's unfair, and probably it is. And maybe even, God and Satan themselves bet against you. You're going to aim up and maintain your dignity and your integrity? Or are you going to take a bad situation and make it into every goddamn nightmare you can possibly imagine? Think, well, of course you have to aim up no matter what happens.
He says that God and Satan are betting against him. But he already said at the beginning, which I like the way he said it at first, was Satan said, if you do this stuff, he's going to curse you to your face. And God says, I don't think so. Have at it. And so, I don't really like the framing of it being a bet, but fine. Like, God and Satan are betting, but God knows Job and knows Job will come out of this the way he does. And Job you could even say that Job basically says things about God and to God that you shouldn't say or do. So, for example, he says, God hunts me and he fills me with his arrows, and I drink in his poison, and he's always after me. And you don't put that into a Sunday school lesson where you're like, all right, kids, God's going to fill you with his arrows and you're going to drink his poison. But God doesn't rebuke him for any of that. And in fact, God says Job was right in how he spoke, because Job was, this is sort of where I'm in agreement with Peterson's idea of sort of aiming in a certain direction, which is Job's aim seemed to be right. But I think even to Job, he thought he was straying, but it was only way he knew to go. Like it was like all the pressure was sort of forcing him that direction. He didn't have like an alternative. He's tried staying silent, and basically he couldn't take it anymore, and it just burst out of him. So
happens to you. And you think, well, that's not fair. It's like, well, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
And what does fair have to do with it? What's your choice? You're going to dig a deeper pit? Or are you going to have some integrity in the face of life's catastrophe? You know, and I think we know the answer to that, because when you meet people who have integrity in the face of catastrophe, you're struck with admiration for them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's your heart speaking, man. It's like,
yeah, and this would be like my sort of pointing towards God's design of this kind of stuff. You know, you start getting in trouble when you start saying that this is a reason for suffering or whatever. But like one of the things that's kind of striking about the book of Job is how many people read that and admire Job, even at the sort of expense of being like, God kind of comes across as kind of a jerk. And I see that as sort of the divine humility of God. That this idea of not being understood, yet achieving the purpose. So let's say the purpose is to glorify Job in the way he can be. You know, he's not a god or should be worshipped or whatever, but in the way that Peterson's talking about, admiration, that's the word. God wants to lift up Job so that everyone will admire him. And for what purpose? Like, for what end? And this is where I would, you know, this is the whole idea of Job ends up being a mediator between God and the people, because the people admire Job and they actually can relate to him, and they know that Job can relate to them. Like you understand that if Job saw what you went through and he had compassion on you, that you know he really understood because he went through similar things. It's the same when, you know, you go through a terrible experience like a miscarriage or a death or something, and people can come to you and say all kinds of things to you and talk to you about it, but to have someone come beside you or talk to you that's been through the same experience or worse, like, that's different. You know, if you went through a miscarriage and then someone comes beside you and like, yeah, we had 2 of those, let's talk about it. Like, those conversations are a lot more weighty than if you know, it's just a random person, or even someone like a pastor that maybe hasn't had that experience, so that kind of stuff holds weight to our ability to kind of reconcile these things in our lives. And so by putting Job through this, by having him raised up to be admired, it really is a move to kind of help people bind together and to help connect them to God somehow, because Job saw God. Yeah, and God doesn't necessarily come off as really great from the book of Job. Like, I see it, but not everyone does. Like, I'm just talking about how people can read it and sort of admire Job and still be like, yeah, God's kind of terrible. But I think that's part of the reason why too, is because through Job you can actually sort of, just knowing the fact that Job was comforted, you're like, oh, maybe there's something there that I don't see yet. There's something Job saw that I don't, and you can sort of go from there and maybe even establish your own relationship with God rather than, just talk about him or avoid him or that kind of stuff.
I don't know how you do it, but I can't help but
Be in awe.
I know I have a friend, a very well-known Canadian, and he got into some business trouble about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and he had a great fortune and a huge business empire, and he lost every bit of it.
Wow.
And then they put him in prison. Right. And he lost everything, and he lost almost all of his friends. And they put him in prison in Florida, in a rough prison. He wrote a book there, and he got 200 people through high school.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
That was his choice.
Yeah.
It's like, even though it's as bad as it can get, I'm going to have some dignity for myself. And
and do some good.
Right.
And he did. He's still in touch with the people that he got through high school. He said every single person he tutored graduated.
Wow.
No kidding. Wow.
That's admirable.
That's for sure. And
'Cause,
surprising.
it's how when people react whenever it's going tough, that's really where you see people,
Yeah, well, and you want to have a vision of yourself in a situation like that too. It's like maybe look, part of the Christian injunction, we were talking about Christianity earlier. So there's the fundamental Christian injunction is that you pick up your cross and you march uphill. What does that mean? Well, it means that's true for everybody. What's the cross? You're going to die, and you're probably going to suffer when you die. And probably along the way, the mob is going to come for you and people are going to betray you. That's all going to happen to you. And so how should you react to that? Well, one answer is to be bitter and resentful and cruel and make things worse, or to give up. And you could do that, and you could make a case for why, but obviously all that's going to do is make it worse. Or you can think, Jesus, maybe there's enough to me so that I could actually do that voluntarily and I could do it positively.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that would be Job's integrity. That's kind of what he hangs his hat on. It's like, maybe there's something in me that can bear this weight, and that's what I would call his integrity. And that's why he decides to take his case all the way to God. He doesn't have any fear. But it's interesting because you ask the question, would he do that without have gone through all of this? It's debatable. Like, would he have made this case? You kind of get the impression that it was knocking around inside of his head and his heart before the disasters. That, there's this line that says, that which I feared has come upon me. So he always thought this was a possibility. But then now that it's happened, now that he has nothing to lose, then he can make his case. And it's almost like God's inviting that case to be made. And and it's not just for him, it because Job goes to depths and aims at heights that like I've never done. But in the little depths and the little heights that I have tread in, I relate to him. And so, like, his words can help you through whatever you're going through. And I just come back with the impression, like, that's the whole point of it. And so, like, it wasn't, like, the suffering wasn't for Job. I was talking about this with Dave on the Voxer. Like, some suffering is not for you, it's for someone else. Like, it's yours to bear, but it's not for your benefit. Like, it's just suffering. But if I understand anything from the Bible and what God is like, that nothing goes to waste. And so whatever you carry will be used for something somewhere, and for the good. Nothing's wasted, and nothing's kept secret, and nothing is forgotten. But everything will be transformed, and everything will work to the good. So, all right, well, thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.